Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
I knew what awaited me even before my key touched the lock. The long bike ride, it hadn't been about exercise. Not really. It was preparation, a way to organize the chaos in my head. Every mile, a single, painful thought, sorted and put in its place. I pedaled until the burning in my legs was louder than the screaming in my soul. Reminding myself, again and again, that it wasn't worth exploding. It wasn't worth begging or losing control. Control was all I had left. When I finally turned the key and pushed the door open, the presence hit me. It wasn't a sound. It was the opposite. A silence so heavy, it felt like it had mass. Like it was displacing the very air in the hallway, making it harder to breathe. It was a silence that said everything. A silence thick with the truth that was about to be spoken aloud for the first time. Sophia was at the dining table. Her eyes were fixed on some invisible point between the wooden surface and her own guilt. She didn't look up immediately. Of course she didn't. She waited for me to drop my helmet on the floor with its familiar, hollow clatter, waited for me to approach, as if the 10 feet of distance between us could make any difference in what was about to happen, as if it could soften the blow. When she finally lifted her gaze, her face was a careful mix of shame and expectation. She was waiting for the impact, waiting for me to crumble, to become the broken man she could then try to piece back together. Maybe she was even waiting for an outburst, a rage that would make her feel less like the villain and more like a participant in a tragedy we shared. But I wasn't going to give her a show. I simply looked at her, my expression as blank as I could make it. I felt the strange, hollow calm of a man who had already lost everything. The storm had already passed through me weeks ago, leaving behind a quiet, desolate landscape. This was just the final survey of the damage. Jason, she began, her voice a fragile thing. I need to tell you something. I stood there for a few seconds, letting her words hang in the heavy air. Then, as if my body was just going through programmed motions, I walked past her to the fridge. I opened the door, the cool light spilling onto the floor. I grabbed a pitcher and filled a glass with water. My hand was steady. I took a slow, deliberate sip, the cold liquid a shock to my system. Then, I turned to her, wearing the most neutral expression I could manage. It's about Ian, right? Sophia froze. It was as if the words had physically struck her. The carefully constructed shame on her face dissolved, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and small at our large, empty dining table. The performance was over. The answer was caught in her throat. She tried to maintain some semblance of control, but she had been completely disarmed. My question hadn't been an accusation. It had been a statement of fact, a simple confirmation that stripped her of any power she thought she had in this moment. The script she had mentally rehearsed for weeks. It was now useless. How did you? A tired, empty feeling settled in my bones. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the cold stone a grounding force. Everyone knows, Sophia. I let the words land, soft but heavy. I was just waiting for you to say it out loud. She was silent for a few seconds, her mind racing, trying to recover, trying to find a new script. I was going to tell you, she finally managed, her voice thin. I didn't know how. I rested my elbows on the counter and looked at her, really looked at her. There was no anger left in me. Not even pity. Just a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. The kind of frustration that only exists when you expect more from someone who once held your entire world in their hands. Do you really think I believe that? I asked, my voice flat. That you didn't know how to tell me for all these months? She started stammering excuses, fragmented sentences about timing, about waiting for the right moment. I raised a hand, a quiet gesture asking for silence. Stop. She did. Do you think I didn't notice? I continued, my voice low but cutting through the silence. When our own kids changed the way they looked at you, that they started avoiding even talking to you? Her eyes widened slightly. This was a front she hadn't prepared for. Noah stopped having dinner at the table. He said he had too much homework, every single night. Ava suddenly had a sleepover at her friend's house every weekend. They made up excuses, Sophia. They knew, and they were just waiting for the day I'd finally do something about it. She ran her hands over her face, a gesture of defeat. She was out of words, out of lies. So she switched tactics. She tried an emotional appeal. Jason, I know this hurts you. I'm not going to try to justify what happened, but I want to fix it. I still believe in us. A laugh escaped me. It was a short, dry, joyless sound. You believe in us? Now? Right now? She stood up, taking a hesitant step toward me, her hands outstretched as if to bridge the canyon between us. I took a step back. Stay there, I said, my voice firm. Listen to me. This whole thing, it ended a long time ago. You just didn't notice because you were too busy hiding messages, deleting calls, making up excuses for being late. I watched as the reality of my words settled over her. I didn't want it to be like this, I said, the exhaustion returning. But it was. And it doesn't help to blame the moment, the tough phase we were in, the routine. You had choices. You had time. You had chances. I paused, letting the weight of it sink in. And you wasted them all. She looked so small then, standing there in the middle of our kitchen, trying to piece together the right words. But it was already too late. The words didn't matter anymore. I walked to the hallway, to the small wooden console table where we kept keys and mail. I opened a drawer and came back with a thick manila folder. I placed it on the dining table and pushed it toward her. It slid across the smooth wood, coming to a stop right in front of her. The divorce papers are in there, I said, my voice steady. With dates, signatures, copies of everything. She looked down at the folder as if it were a venomous snake, a piece of her own failure, a printed, notarized reminder of everything she had destroyed. Her eyes darted up to mine, filled with a new kind of disbelief. You already had this ready, she whispered. For weeks. Yes. Then why? Why didn't you give it to me before? I looked at her, my gaze unwavering. Because I wanted to hear it from your mouth. I wanted to see if you still had the courage to be honest. At least once. My voice had remained steady the entire time. It was as if I had already cried everything out on the inside, as if all the pain had been exercised and sweated out during that long bike ride. Before this scene even unfolded, Sophia sank back into her chair, all the energy drained from her body. She took a deep breath, the sound shuddering in the quiet room, and spoke, her voice almost a whisper. I messed up, and I don't know how to move forward from here. You'll figure it out, I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. Alone, I turned and left the room. I walked through the house, grabbed my cycling towel from the laundry room, and went out to the garage. I didn't want to be under the same roof with her for a second longer. The sound of my bike being placed carefully on its rack was the last thing she heard before, I assumed. She began to cry. Outside, in the cool evening air of the garage, I wiped my face with the sweaty towel. And that's when they came. The tears I had held back for weeks. They were there, mingling with my heavy breathing and the crushing frustration of a man who had offered loyalty and received nothing but disdain in return. But as much as it hurt, I knew this was the beginning of the end. And sometimes, the end is the only way to start over. The next morning, the air was thick with unspoken words. Sophia woke up early and tried to follow her routine, a desperate attempt to pretend something was still intact. She made coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen. She set the table like she used to on calmer Sundays, as if that simple gesture could erase the previous night, as if the smell of fresh coffee could bring some kind of peace or redemption. It couldn't. When I walked into the kitchen, she attempted a restrained, hopeful smile. It wasn't returned. I just gave her a brief glance, grabbed my usual mug from the hook, and leaned against the counter, putting as much space between us as possible. I knew any attempt at normalcy was useless, but she tried again anyway. I know things are terrible, she said, her voice careful. But I ended things with Ian. I wanted to save what we have. I still do. I took a few seconds to respond. I spun the mug in my hands, feeling its familiar weight. I took a sip of the coffee, looked down at the floor for a moment, and then raised my gaze directly to hers. When I spoke, my voice was clear, unhurried, as if every word had been memorized and rehearsed. You didn't end anything, Sophia. He did. She opened her mouth to argue, but I was quicker. You just accepted it because you had no other choice. He ended it because Grace found out. She's the one who cut him off, who threatened to take the kids, who pressured him into ending it. He found himself cornered. And when there was no way to keep up the lie, he dropped you. I watched her face as the words landed, each one a precision strike. That's why it ended, I finished. My voice cold and hard as steel. Not because you wanted to fix something here. She leaned back in her chair as if she'd been physically struck. Her eyes welled up with tears, but none fell. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was shame. I continued, my tone even, just emptying out everything I had kept locked inside for so long. I know more than you think. I know about the after-work meetings, I said, ticking off the lies on my fingers, the flimsy excuses about being busy, the afternoons when you said you needed time alone. I know about every single one of them, because Grace told me. Sophia's head snapped up, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. You talked to Grace. A small, bitter smile touched my lips. I do. I have been for months, ever since she sent me that first message, asking if I thought something was wrong between the two of them. I let her absorb the full weight of that revelation. The silence between us grew thicker, heavier than it had been the night before. This was a truth she had never, in a million years, anticipated. She suspected, I explained, my voice calm. She reached out to me cautiously, respectfully. She said she just wanted to confirm before she took any action, and from there, we started sharing information. After a while, it turned into confidences. Then, support. I could see the gears turning in her mind, the pieces clicking into a horrifying new picture. I pushed myself off the counter and approached the table. I leaned on it with both hands, my face close to hers, forcing her to meet my gaze. While you were with her husband, Sophia, I was talking to his wife. We shared the same therapist. We even went together a few times. We joined the same cycling group. She knew I needed someone who understood, and I knew she was dealing with the exact same pain. The difference is, we both chose the truth. Sophia pressed her fingers against each other, her knuckles white. The pain of knowing that Grace, the other woman, the wife of her lover, had taken that space, that she had been so close to me during my darkest time, was a kind of silent, profound humiliation. But I didn't spare her. Can you even imagine how hard it was? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, but laced with the ice of my restraint. To stay in control while you lied straight to my face? I pretended to believe you because I wanted to see how far you'd go. With every new excuse, I watched you with colder and colder eyes. It was like you truly believed no one would ever notice. She tried to argue, to fall back on her old excuses. I got involved during a fragile moment. I was insecure. I felt invisible. I cut her off, my voice firm. You weren't invisible. You just wanted to live an adventure without caring about the mess you left behind. What you lacked was character, Sophia, not attention. What you lacked was responsibility, not affection. She fell silent. My words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable, cutting off any attempt to justify her actions. I stepped back and leaned against the sink again, crossing my arms. You always had everything here. You had tolerance, you had love, you had a partner, and you threw it all away for something shallow, something disposable. And now you want to rebuild it all on a foundation of empty words. I shook my head slowly. That's not how it works. She lowered her head. A lump formed in her throat, but she knew, finally, that nothing she could say would change anything. Still, she tried one last, desperate argument. And you? She asked, her voice trembling. Are you going to be with her? With Grace? I stared at her for a long moment before responding. I'm not with anyone. And even if I were, it would be for completely different reasons than yours. Because it wasn't in a bed that we connected, Sophia. It was in the pain, in the exchange of truths, in the respect that remained for each other, even amidst the wreckage. She seemed to shrink. Her body collapsed inward. Her shoulders dropped as if the weight of my words was physically pressing down on her. She stood up slowly, her movement stiff, and left the kitchen without saying another word. I stayed there, staring into the emptiness of my coffee mug. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel anger. All I felt was the quiet, cold certainty that this story had ended the moment she chose to lie for the very first time. Everything else was just the consequence. The days that followed were like living in a ghost house, a house where everything was visually in its usual spot, but the entire atmosphere was out of place. The silence stretched through the rooms like a second skin, uncomfortable and constant. Sophia tried to maintain a minimal routine, as if the simple gestures of domestic life were a way to pretend she still had some control. She woke up early, tidied the room, prepared coffee, but the gestures no longer served anyone but herself. I barely met her gaze. My answers to her questions were short, direct, only what was absolutely necessary. Her presence had become a weight I had to carry while I figured out how to end things with the least amount of emotional damage possible for the kids. In a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of normalcy, she approached me one late afternoon. Let's go out for dinner, she suggested, her voice thin. We need to talk, away from this house, away from the weight these rooms carry. I was reviewing some papers at the counter. I just lifted my eyes and said, I'm not going to play that role with you in public, Sophia. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. There wasn't even room for pretense anymore. The rejection was objective and final. That night, she ate dinner alone. I saw her from the hallway, sitting at the corner of our long dining table, pushing food around her plate without really eating. I came in later, grabbed a sandwich, and went straight upstairs. She stayed there for a long time, staring at the empty chairs, remembering, I imagined, all the conversations, the laughter, the stories shared in that same space. A space that was now just a room with furniture. Not even the kids showed up anymore. Ava had called earlier in the week. Her voice was strained. She said she needed some time away, that the betrayal had affected her more than she imagined. Noah, always harsher, was more direct. I don't want to talk to you right now, Mom, he'd said, his voice cold. Maybe later. It was, at that moment, I think, that Sophia finally realized the damage had spilled far beyond the boundaries of our marriage. It had fractured the entire family. The next morning, while tidying our son's room, a habit she clung to, she found the letter left on his desk. It was from Noah. I found her sitting on the edge of his bed, the paper trembling in her hands. He had written it by hand, just like he used to when he was little, leaving notes for us before he went to school. The content, however, was far from childhood innocence. He wrote that he felt ashamed, that he never imagined his own mother could do something so petty. He wrote that watching me try to stay strong while everything crumbled around me had been too painful, and because of that, he needed distance. He needed space to avoid treating his own mother like a stranger. When she finished reading, she finally broke down completely. She cried like someone who has just realized they've lost far more than they ever thought they had to lose. It wasn't just me who had emotionally left. The kids had, too. The family, as she knew it, had dissolved. She tried calling Ava. It went straight to voicemail. She texted Noah. No reply. She tried recording a video message to explain herself, but I saw her delete it before sending. She was realizing, too late, that words at this point were useless. She had said so many things over the years, and now, none of them seemed credible. She tried finding refuge in small, desperate actions. She bought the kids' favorite dishes for dinner. She left a note of kindness on the bathroom mirror. She prepared a special Sunday lunch, an elaborate meal for a family that was no longer there. Neither of them showed up. No response. No reaction. I had witnessed it all in silence. Late that Sunday afternoon, I approached her at the sink where she was washing dishes that had never been used. I stood beside her, facing the window, and said firmly, You need to stop. You need to stop living like it's possible to reverse this. What we built has already collapsed. The kids are just trying to survive the impact. So am I. She just nodded, too drained to argue. I grabbed my car keys and left. I was gone for hours. Sophia probably imagined 1,000 scenarios. She probably tried to convince herself I wasn't with Grace, but the doubt must have lingered. And in truth, the worst part for her probably wasn't the possibility of me being with someone else, but the simple, brutal fact that any place in the world would be better than being in that house, with her. When I returned, the house was dark. I found her asleep on the sofa. I didn't wake her. I just went upstairs. A few days later, she was gone. I woke up one morning to find her side of the bed neatly made. A small suitcase was missing from the closet. She hadn't left a note. She hadn't said goodbye. She had just disappeared. It was a quiet, anticlimactic end to our life together. She called a week later. I answered. I'm staying with my sister, she said, her voice small. Okay, I replied. A long pause. Take care of the kids for me, she finally whispered. I responded with a short sentence, but one that I knew would end any lingering hope she might have had. They already know who truly takes care of them. And then I hung up. The divorce process moved forward with the cold precision of a well-rehearsed play. I didn't leave room for improvisation or allow myself to weaken in the face of bureaucratic details. I delivered the documents on time. I responded to emails clearly and concisely. I scheduled meetings with the lawyer without delay. For weeks, I followed this routine with the same focus a surgeon uses when holding a scalpel, knowing every step was a final, necessary cut. When the final signature came, I sat quietly in my car for a few minutes, the signed paper in my hands. I just breathed, deep, slow breaths, as if finally surfacing after being submerged for a very long time. Sophia tried reaching out a few other times. She sent long, rambling messages. Some were filled with guilt, others tried to recall old, happy moments, as if nostalgia could somehow rebuild the city she herself had burned to the ground. I read them, but I never replied. I read them because I wanted to understand how far she would go with those words. And I realized that even in her apologies, there was a certain vanity, an attempt to be forgiven so she could ease her own conscience, rather than a genuine desire to repair anything she had broken. It was on a Wednesday afternoon that I decided it was time to pack up the last remaining memories. I went up to the attic. I pulled out old boxes of photos of the kids, separated albums, documents, school letters, everything that was part of the foundation of that family. A family which, despite crumbling, still represented the foundation of who I was. I didn't rush. I placed the items in new boxes, carefully, one by one. A picture of Ava's first steps, a finger painting by Noah, a postcard from our first vacation together. I looked at each one, acknowledged the memory, and then placed it in the box. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about containing it, organizing it, until I felt it had been properly sealed away with tape. Afterward, I moved on to the next step, starting over. Grace, meanwhile, was facing similar rituals. She had left the house she had lived in with Ian. She rented a small, bright apartment to start over with her kid. She was determined, just as I was, not to let the betrayal define her life. As she and I began talking more frequently, we noticed an invisible line of care forming between us. It was built effortlessly, grounded in our shared pain, but it was growing into something else, something lighter. Contrary to what many might think, there was no rush. There was no thirst to fill a void. We simply met, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for silent walks in the park. It was enough just to be in the presence of someone who didn't need an explanation. It was during one of these walks that Grace mentioned, almost as if talking about a forgotten old dream, that she had always wanted to visit the state of Maine. She said she had never seen its coastline, but had saved photos and itineraries in a virtual folder for years. I listened attentively. I didn't say anything at the time, but I went home, and I began researching on my own. A few weeks later, I showed up at her apartment door with 2 plane tickets. Her eyes widened in surprise. "What is this?" "A short trip," I said simply. "Just to breathe. Away from the wreckage left by others." During that trip to Maine, we allowed ourselves to laugh. Genuinely, deeply, for the first time in a long, long while. We walked along windy coastal trails, the salty air sharp and clean. We ate at hidden small restaurants, sharing plates of fresh seafood. We took photos without worrying about who might see them. There was no guilt. There was no rush. It was just a well-deserved break for 2 people who had carried the weight of the world on their backs for too long. One night, we were sitting on a wooden bench, watching the dark ocean waves crash against the rocks below. The only sounds were the sea and the wind. "I never thought I could feel safe again," Grace said quietly, her voice almost carried away by the breeze. I looked out at the dark water. "And I thought safety was living within a predictable routine," I responded. "Now I understand that safety is being with someone who respects you." Even in the silence, after that trip, we returned lighter. The conversations became more frequent, the meetings more regular. One day, my daughter Ava showed up at my house. She saw Grace in the kitchen, preparing a snack, and she just smiled. A real, warm smile. She walked over, grabbed a knife, and started helping chop vegetables. She stayed there, chatting with Grace as if they were old friends. Grace had always been so careful with my kids, never wanting to take up a space that wasn't freely given, but the affection between them grew naturally, built on kindness and mutual respect. Noah, always more reserved, took longer, but when he needed help organizing his things for his move to college, it was Grace who spent an entire afternoon with us, packing boxes and labeling them, making a stressful day feel manageable. No one ever said out loud that Grace and I were together. It wasn't necessary. Our actions spoke more clearly than any label could. One night, after a simple dinner at home, just the 3 of us, Noah looked at me across the table. "You're calmer, Dad," he said, "happier. That's what matters to us." I smiled, a real smile that reached my eyes. I placed my hand on his shoulder and responded, "And that's all I want to keep being." Meanwhile, across town, Sophia watched everything from a distance. Sometimes I imagined her scrolling through the kids' social media, seeing photos of family gatherings where she wasn't present. She would see the new sparkle in Ava's eyes, the calm confidence on Noah's face. She received spaced-out messages from them, short and polite. "Everything's fine here. The test went well. I visited Dad today." It must have been like watching her own family live on, realizing they no longer needed her. One afternoon, she called me. I saw her name on the screen, hesitated for a second, and then answered. I knew I had to end it, once and for all. On the other end of the line, her voice sounded weaker than I had ever heard it. "Do you hate me?" she asked. I sighed, a long, slow breath. "No, Sophia. I don't." I let that sink in before I continued. "And maybe that's what bothers you the most. Because if I hated you, I'd still be stuck in everything that happened. I'd still be connected to you. But I just moved on. And you're still standing there." She was silent for a long time. I could hear her faint breathing. She tried to say something, but no words came out. I ended the call with a simple, "Take care, Sophia." That night, I cooked dinner with Grace. We laughed when a recipe went wrong. We listened to music playing softly from a phone on the counter. And then we sat on the porch, watching the sun go down. The world kept moving forward. The wounds were healing, turning into scars that told a story of survival and love, the kind that grows slowly, from a foundation of truth, respect, and complicity. It was finally making sense. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next.